The gunshot that shattered the still Wyoming afternoon sent Zachary Nash diving beneath the velvet seat of the westbound stage, her heart hammering against her ribs as hoofbeats thundered closer, and men shouted orders she could barely comprehend through the ringing in her ears. She had been traveling from Cheyenne to Green River, Wyoming in the spring of 1878, a journey she had made reluctantly after receiving word that her aunt had taken ill and needed someone to manage her small boarding house. At 22 years old, Zachary had never imagined her life would lead her to the dusty frontier, but family obligations had a way of reshaping even the most carefully laid plans. The other passengers, a wealthy woman named Mrs. Eleanor Whitmore and her maid, had spent most of the journey complaining about the heat, the dust, and the uncivilized nature of Wyoming territory. Now those complaints seemed absurdly trivial as masked riders surrounded the stage. "Everyone out," a voice barked, rough and commanding. Zachary pressed herself harder against the floorboards, her traveling dress already coated in dirt. Through the gap beneath the seat, she could see boots hitting the ground, hear Mrs. Whitmore's shrill protests, and the driver's muttered curses. Her fingers found the small derringer her father had insisted she carry, though she had never fired it, and doubted she could bring herself to do so now. "I said everyone." The stage door flew open with such force it nearly came off its hinges. A hand reached in, grabbed what it could find in the dim interior, and yanked. Zachary had no time to scream before she was hauled out into the blinding sunlight, stumbling over her skirts as strong arms caught her around the waist. "Got her, boss," someone shouted triumphantly. Zachary's vision adjusted enough to see 4 masked men on horseback, and she was being held by a fifth whose face was covered by a red bandana. Through the chaos, she heard Mrs. Whitmore's voice, sharp with indignation. "That is not me, you absolute fool. I am Mrs. Whitmore. That girl is nobody." The man holding Zachary went very still. Even through the bandana, she could sense his sudden tension. He turned, and for the first time, Zachary saw eyes that were the color of a summer storm, gray-blue and currently filled with something between frustration and disbelief. "What?" His voice was different now, confused rather than commanding. "You have grabbed the wrong woman," Mrs. Whitmore announced, drawing herself up to her full height despite the gun one of the other outlaws had pointed in her direction. "I am the one traveling with the railroad bonds. That girl is a penniless relation going to care for an invalid aunt." The outlaw's grip on Zachary loosened slightly, and she could feel him looking down at her with what she imagined was mortification, though the bandana hid his expression. She stared back, taking in details despite her fear. The well-made leather vest, the clean shirt beneath the dust of the road, the fact that his hands, though calloused, were not rough in their hold on her. "Damn it all," he muttered, low enough that perhaps only she could hear. One of the other riders, a lean man with nervous energy radiating from every movement, called out, "Cole, we need to move." Someone might have heard that warning shot, Cole. So that was his name. Zachary filed the information away even as her mind raced through her options. She was being kidnapped by mistake, held by an outlaw who had apparently intended to ransom a wealthy woman, and had instead grabbed a nobody from Philadelphia, who had exactly $14 to her name and a small trunk of practical dresses. "Let me go," Zachary said, surprised by the steadiness in her own voice. "She is right. I am worthless to you." Those storm-colored eyes met hers again, and she saw something shift in them. Cole glanced back at Mrs. Whitmore, at the strong box being guarded by the driver, then at the distant horizon where dust might signal approaching riders. "Can't do that," he said, and before Zachary could protest, he lifted her onto his horse with an ease that spoke of considerable strength. He swung up behind her, one arm iron hard around her waist. "Move out, Cole, what the hell?" the nervous rider protested. "That's not the plan. Plans change, Danny. Ride." And they did, thundering away from the stage in a direction that took them off the main road and into the rougher country that characterized so much of Wyoming territory. Zachary clutched the saddle horn, her body jolting with each stride of the powerful horse beneath them. Behind her, Cole's chest was solid, his breathing steady despite the chaos they had just created. She wanted to scream, to fight, to do something other than hold on, but the ground was moving far too fast beneath them for jumping to be anything other than suicidal. They rode for what felt like hours but was probably less than one, moving through terrain that grew increasingly rocky and wild. The other 4 riders stayed close, occasionally calling out to one another, but Cole remained silent behind her. Zachary's mind worked frantically. She had been kidnapped by accident. They had wanted Mrs. Whitmore for ransom, presumably knowing she carried valuable bonds. Instead, they had her, and she could not fathom what they would do when they realized how completely useless she was to them. Finally, when the sun was beginning its descent toward the western mountains, they slowed. A narrow canyon opened before them, and they rode single file through its entrance until it widened into a hidden space where water trickled from rocks, and a few hardy trees provided shade. There was a rough camp here, clearly used before. Fire-blackened stones, a lean-to built against the canyon wall, supplies covered with canvas. Cole dismounted first, then reached up to help Zachary down. She ignored his offered hand and slid off by herself, stumbling when her feet hit the ground after so long in the saddle. He steadied her anyway, those hands on her arms gentle despite their strength. "I apologize for the rough ride," he said, and she could hear that he meant it. Zachary stepped back from his touch and raised her chin, meeting his eyes with all the courage she could muster. "You have kidnapped the wrong woman. When you discover I am telling the truth, what will you do with me?" The other men had dismounted as well. The nervous one, Danny, was pacing. "Cole, this is bad. This is real bad. They will have the sheriff out looking, maybe even territorial marshals." Another man, older with gray threading his dark hair, pulled down his bandana to reveal a weathered face. "Boy's got a point. We grabbed ourselves a heap of trouble and no profit." Cole pulled down his own bandana, and Zachary found herself staring. He was younger than she had expected, perhaps 26 or 27, with a strong jaw, sun-bronzed skin, and those remarkable eyes that now held a mixture of frustration and something that looked almost like guilt. He was, she realized with some annoyance at herself, strikingly handsome in the way men who lived hard outdoor lives often were. "I know that, Frank," Cole said to the older man. He ran a hand through dark hair that had been flattened by his hat. "I moved fast when I heard horses coming from the east. Thought if we did not grab her right then, we would lose our chance." "Well, you grabbed all right," said a third man, this one stocky and red-faced. "Grabbed us a whole different set of problems." Cole shot him a sharp look. "Thank you for that observation, Pete. Very helpful." The fifth man, younger than the others and silent until now, spoke up quietly. "What are we going to do with her?" Everyone looked at Zachary, who felt her heart rate pick up again. She was alone in a hidden canyon with 5 outlaws who had committed a crime, but received none of the benefits they had anticipated. She could not be ransomed. She could identify them, and she was now a liability. Cole seemed to understand the direction of her thoughts because he shook his head firmly. "Nobody is doing anything to her. This is my mistake, and I will figure it out." "We could just leave her here," Danny suggested. "Give us a day or 2 head start before she finds her way back to civilization." "In this country," Frank scoffed, That would be the same as killing her, and you know it. I can ride, Zachary heard herself say. Give me a horse and I will ride to Green River and say nothing about any of you. Cole studied her for a long moment, and she had the distinct feeling he was seeing more than she wanted him to see. You would say nothing, after we kidnapped you at gunpoint. I would say I was confused that it happened so fast, that you wore masks. Zachary met his gaze steadily. I do not want trouble any more than you want to be caught. Let me go, and we can both pretend this never happened. She is lying, Pete said flatly. The second she gets to a town, she will be telling everyone about the 5 men who grabbed her from the stage. We'll have every lawman in the territory on our trail. Zachary opened her mouth to protest, but she could see in their faces that Pete had voiced what most of them were thinking. She was a witness, and witnesses were dangerous. Fear curled through her stomach, but she forced herself to stand tall. Cole held up a hand for silence. Make camp. We are staying here tonight while I think. The men dispersed to their tasks with practiced efficiency, clearly accustomed to working together. Zachary stood awkwardly, uncertain what to do with herself. Cole gestured toward a flat rock near where the water pooled. Sit. You must be exhausted. She was, but she did not want to show weakness. Still, her legs ached and her back hurt from the hard ride, so she sat, keeping her eyes on the men as they built a fire and began preparing a simple meal. Cole crouched by the water, splashing his face and neck, then returned to sit on another rock a few feet from her. What is your name? He asked. Zachary Nash. His eyebrows rose slightly. Zachary, that is unusual for a woman. My father wanted a son. She had explained this countless times in her life. He got me instead and gave me the name anyway. Most people call me Zara. Zara, he repeated, and something about the way he said it made her skin prickle with awareness. I am Cole Sutherland. Those are Danny, Frank, Pete, and the quiet one is James. I did not ask for introductions. No, but you are going to be here at least tonight, so seemed polite. Zachary studied him, trying to reconcile the courteous man before her with the outlaw who had grabbed her from a stage. Why did you do this? Rob the stage, I mean. Cole was quiet for a moment, looking out at the canyon walls that glowed gold in the late afternoon light. That is a complicated question with a complicated answer. We have time, apparently. A small smile tugged at his mouth. We do at that. He leaned back against the rock behind him, crossing his arms. I grew up on a ranch about 50 miles north of here. My father built it from nothing, spent 30 years turning it into something that could support a family. 2 years ago, a railroad company decided they wanted to run a line right through our best grazing land. They made an offer. My father refused. They made threats. He still refused. Zachary listened, watching his face as he spoke. There was pain there, old but not forgotten. One night the barn burned, all our horses gone. Then cattle started disappearing, always just enough to hurt but not enough to prove anything. My father went to the law. The sheriff said he could not help without proof. The railroad made another offer, lower this time. My father was getting old, tired. The fight was killing him. Cole's jaw tightened. He signed the papers, took their money, which was barely enough to buy a small place elsewhere. 3 months later he had a stroke, been in a chair ever since, barely able to speak. That is terrible, Zachary said quietly, meaning it. The railroad bonds that Mrs. Whitmore was carrying, those represent profit from the same company that destroyed my father's life's work. Seemed fitting to take a piece of it back. So you became an outlaw for revenge. For justice, Cole corrected. The law did not help us. The law served the railroad, same as it always serves whoever has the most money. Sometimes a man has to make his own justice. Zachary could not entirely argue with the sentiment, even if she disagreed with the method. She had seen enough in her own life to know that the law was not always just, that money and power often mattered more than right and wrong. Still, kidnapping seemed an extreme response. "What about them?" She gestured to the other men. "What are their stories?" "Frank worked for my father for 20 years. When we lost the ranch, he lost his job and his home. Danny and Pete are brothers, lost their own place to a crooked banker who foreclosed on a loan that should have had another year to run. James is Danny and Pete's cousin, followed them when they had nowhere else to go. So you are all outlaws because the world was unfair to you." Cole's eyes narrowed. "You say that like you have never experienced unfairness yourself." "I did not say that." Zachary looked down at her dusty dress, at her hands that were dirty from hiding on the stage floor. "But I did not turn to crime because of it. No. What did you do?" "I endured. I made the best of what I had. I accepted that life is often difficult and rarely fair." "That sounds like giving up." "That sounds like being realistic." They stared at each other, and Zachary felt something electric pass between them, some combination of challenge and understanding that she could not quite name. Cole looked away first, toward the fire where Frank was setting up a coffee pot. "I am sorry you were caught up in this," he said finally. "Truly, you should not be here." "Then let me go." "I cannot, not yet." He stood, brushing dust from his pants. "But I give you my word that you will not be harmed. You have my protection for what an outlaw's word is worth." He walked away before she could respond, joining the others by the fire. Zachary watched him, her mind a whirl of conflicting thoughts. She should be terrified, should be planning escape, should be thinking only of survival. Instead, she found herself wondering about Cole Sutherland, about the man who robbed stages for revenge but apologized for rough rides, who spoke of justice, but knew he was breaking the law. Dinner was hardtack, beans and coffee so strong it could strip paint. Zachary ate sitting apart from the men, though Cole brought her portion to her himself. The other four watched this with varying expressions. Frank with amusement, Danny with worry, Pete with suspicion, and James with simple curiosity. As darkness fell and stars began emerging in the strip of sky visible between the canyon walls, Frank pulled out a harmonica and played a slow, melancholy tune. Danny sang along in a surprisingly good voice, a song about lost love and distant homes. Zachary found herself relaxing despite everything, lulled by the music and the warmth of the fire. Cole sat across from her, and she noticed he kept glancing her way when he thought she was not looking. Each time their eyes met, he looked quickly away, and she felt that strange electricity again, that sense of connection that made no sense given the circumstances. When the music ended and the men began bedding down for the night, Cole approached her with a blanket. "It gets cold in the canyon at night," he said. "You can sleep in the lean-to. I will be right outside if you need anything." "I will need my freedom," Zachary said, but without real heat. "Tomorrow," he said. "I promise I will figure something out tomorrow." She took the blanket and made her way to the lean-to, which was more shelter than she had expected. Someone had built a raised platform to keep sleepers off the cold ground, and there were even a few canvas bags that could serve as pillows. She lay down fully clothed, wrapping the blanket around herself, and stared up at the rock ceiling above her. She could hear the men talking in low voices by the dying fire, could hear Cole's voice among them, though she could not make out words. What was she going to do? Even if they let her go tomorrow, she would still be in the middle of Wyoming wilderness with no clear idea how to get to Green River. And what would she tell her aunt? The stage company? The law sleep seemed impossible, but exhaustion eventually claimed her. Her last conscious thought was of storm-colored eyes and a voice that said tomorrow like a promise. She woke to the smell of coffee and the sound of arguing. We cannot just keep her, Cole. That was Danny's voice, pitched higher with stress. Every day she is with us is another day the law has to track us down. And we cannot just turn her loose to tell everyone which direction we headed. Pete's voice, angry and afraid in equal measure. Zachary sat up carefully, peering out of the lean-to. The sun was just rising, painting the canyon walls in shades of pink and gold. The 5 men stood by the fire, clearly in the middle of a heated discussion. Cole stood with his back to her, arms crossed. I will not abandon a woman in the wilderness, and that is final. Then, what is your plan? Frank asked, sounding more curious than confrontational. Because the way I see it, we have limited options. I am working on it. Work faster, Pete snapped. We should have been in Colorado by now, dividing up the take and going our separate ways. Instead, we are stuck here with a witness who can hang us all. I would not hang you, Zachary said, emerging from the lean-to. All 5 men turned to stare at her. I already told you. Let me go and I will say nothing. Pete laughed harshly. And we should believe you. Why? Because I am giving you my word, the same as Cole gave me his word I would not be harmed. A woman's word, Pete scoffed, is worth as much as a man's. Zachary shot back, anger rising. More, perhaps, since I have not made a habit of robbing stages. Danny made a choking sound that might have been a laugh quickly suppressed. Even Frank was grinning. Cole turned to face her fully, and she saw approval in his eyes. She has spirit, Frank observed. Give her that. Spirit does not solve our problem, Pete said. Cole, you are the one who got us into this mess. You need to get us out. Cole's jaw tightened, but he nodded. You are right. This is my responsibility. He looked at Zachary. Can you ride well enough to handle a horse on your own? Yes. Can you navigate by landmarks? I have a decent sense of direction. He seemed to come to a decision. Then here is what we will do. I will take you most of the way to Green River myself. Get you close enough that you can make it the rest of the way safely, but far enough from our camp that you cannot lead anyone back here. The rest of you head to Colorado as planned. Cole, that is stupid, Danny said immediately. You will be alone, no backup if something goes wrong. It is the only way I can be sure she makes it safely. I can make it safely on my own, Zachary protested. Maybe, Cole agreed. But I am not willing to bet your life on maybe. This is my fault. I will see it through. The other men exchanged glances. Finally, Frank shrugged. It is your neck, Cole. We'll split your share of the take when we meet up in Denver next month. You do that, Cole said dryly. They broke camp with efficiency, dividing supplies and checking weapons. Zachary was given a canteen, some hardtack, and a horse, a sturdy bay mare with kind eyes. She mounted up, adjusting her skirts as best she could for riding astride, which earned her another approving look from Frank. You are all right, Miss Nash, the older man said. Take care of our boy here. I am not your boy, Frank, Cole said, swinging into his own saddle. Near enough. Known you since you were in short pants. The parting was quick. Danny, Pete, James, and Frank headed southwest toward Colorado. Cole and Zachary rode north, back toward the main road, but taking a route that kept them in the rougher country where they were less likely to be seen. They rode in silence for the first hour, Zachary acutely aware of being alone with Cole now, without the buffer of the other men. He kept them at an easy pace, stopping occasionally to check their bearings or let the horses rest. The spring sun climbed higher, warming the air but not yet reaching the brutal heat of summer. You really have an aunt in Green River? Cole asked during one of their rest stops. I do. She runs a boarding house. She is ill, needs help managing it. What were you doing before? Zachary hesitated, then decided there was no harm in answering. I lived in Philadelphia with my father. He is a professor of literature. When my mother died 5 years ago, I kept house for him and helped with his research. Sounds like a quiet life. It was, predictable, safe, organized. She looked around at the wild landscape surrounding them. The opposite of this. Do you miss it, Philadelphia? Yes and no. It was familiar, but it was also stifling. My father loves me, but he has never quite forgiven me for not being the son he wanted. Everything I did was measured against what a son could have done better. Cole's expression darkened. That is not right. No, but it was my reality. Zachary took a drink from her canteen. When Aunt Margaret's letter came, part of me saw it as an escape, a chance to be somewhere new, to be useful in a way my father never quite appreciated. And now you have been kidnapped before you even arrived. Yes, well, life has a sense of humor. He laughed at that, a genuine sound that transformed his face. Zachary found herself smiling in response, then caught herself. She should not be laughing with her kidnapper. She should not be noticing how his eyes crinkled at the corners when he smiled, or how competent he looked on horseback, or how safe she felt despite the absurdity of that feeling. They rode on, and as the day progressed, they talked more. Cole told her about growing up on the ranch, about learning to ride before he could properly walk, about summers spent moving cattle and winters spent mending fence. Zachary told him about Philadelphia society, about the endless round of polite conversations and meaningless social obligations, about the books she had read and the places she dreamed of seeing. "You should have been a teacher," Cole said at one point. "The way you talk about books, about ideas. You light up. Women can be teachers out here," Zachary said, latching onto the observation. "Back east it is considered slightly scandalous, but I have heard that in the territories there is more freedom." "There is freedom, all right. Freedom to work yourself to death, freeze in winter, bake in summer, and lose everything you have built to people with more money and fewer scruples. You are bitter." "I am realistic," he said, throwing her own words from the previous day back at her. She smiled despite herself. Point taken. As afternoon turned toward evening, Cole led them to another sheltered spot, this one a cluster of rocks with a natural overhang that would hide their fire. He insisted on doing all the work of making camp, building the fire, and preparing a simple meal while Zachary sat and watched. "You do not have to wait on me," she said. "I can help. You are a guest, an unwilling one, but still. I am a kidnapping victim. Yes, but a well-treated one, I hope." She could not argue with that. Despite everything, Cole had been nothing but courteous, even protective. It was deeply confusing. As they ate, watching the fire paint dancing shadows on the rocks, Zachary asked the question that had been bothering her all day. "When we get close to Green River tomorrow, you will just leave me and ride away. That is the plan. And then what?" "You will meet your friends in Colorado and keep robbing stages." Cole was quiet for a long moment. "I do not know," he said finally. "This was supposed to be one job, get enough money to buy a small spread somewhere, start over. But it went wrong, and now I am not sure what comes next." "You could stop, find honest work." "With a price on my head," he shook his head. "The minute we grabbed that stage, we became wanted men. Maybe I could disappear into a city somewhere, but that is not the life I want. I am a rancher, or I was. That is all I know." "That is not all you are," Zachary said softly. "You are also someone who makes sure a kidnapped woman is fed and warm, someone who rides 2 days out of his way to make sure she gets home safe. That is not the same as being just an outlaw." He looked at her across the fire, and the intensity in his gaze made her breath catch. "What are you saying, Zara?" "I am saying that maybe who you are is not the same as what you have done." "That is a nice thought. Do not think the law will see it that way." "Maybe the law is not the only thing that matters." They held each other's eyes, and Zachary felt something shift between them, some barrier falling away. She should not be feeling this draw toward him, this sense that she understood him in a way that went beyond the few days they had known each other. It was ridiculous. He had kidnapped her. She should hate him, fear him, want nothing more than to get away. Instead, she wanted to move closer to the fire, to sit beside him instead of across from him, to ask him to tell her more about his life, his hopes, his dreams. "We should sleep," Cole said, his voice rougher than before. "Tomorrow will be a long day." He gave her the blanket again, laid out his own bedroll a respectful distance away. Zachary lay awake for a long time, staring up at the stars that were so much brighter here than they had ever been in Philadelphia. She could hear Cole's breathing, steady and even, and wondered if he was really asleep or lying awake as she was. The next morning brought clouds and a chill wind that promised rain. They packed up quickly and rode hard, Cole pushing the pace in a way he had not before. Around midday, they crested a rise and he pointed to the distance. "Green River is about 10 miles that direction. You should be able to make it before nightfall if you keep a steady pace." Zachary looked where he was pointing, then back at him. "This is where we part ways. It has to be." She knew he was right, but something in her rebelled against the idea. In just 2 days, Cole Sutherland had become more than her kidnapper. He had become someone she wanted to know better, someone who made her laugh and think and feel alive in a way she had not felt in years. "I do not want to say goodbye," she admitted. His hand tightened on the reins. "Zara, I know it is insane. I know you are an outlaw and I should be running away as fast as this horse can carry me. But I also know that I have felt more in the past 2 days than I have felt in years, and the thought of never seeing you again makes me want to cry." Cole dismounted in one smooth motion and came to stand beside her horse. He looked up at her, and she saw her own conflicted feelings reflected in his face. "I have been trying not to think about you," he said quietly. "Trying not to notice how brave you are, how smart, how beautiful. Trying not to imagine what it would be like if things were different, if I was different. You do not have to be different, you just have to be willing to try." "Try what? To be a better man. I grabbed you from a stage at gunpoint, Zara. I am not the hero in this story." "Maybe not," she said. "But you are not the villain either. You are just a man who made some bad choices because you were hurt and angry, but it is not too late to make different choices." He reached up, and she took his hand, letting him help her down from the horse. They stood close enough that she could see the individual shades of gray and blue in his eyes, close enough to feel the warmth of him. "If I could go back and change things," he said, "I would have met you differently. Properly in town maybe, been introduced by a mutual friend. I would have asked permission to call on you, brought you flowers, courted you the right way. We do not get to choose how we meet people," Zachary said, "only what we do after." "And what do you want to do after?" She should have said goodbye. Should have taken her horse and ridden away and never looked back. Should have been sensible, practical, realistic. Instead, she kissed him. It was brief, barely more than a brush of lips, but it was enough to send electricity through her entire body. Cole froze for half a second, then his arms came around her waist, pulling her closer as he deepened the kiss. Zachary had been kissed before, chased pecks from overeager suitors back in Philadelphia, but this was something entirely different. This was heat and promise and a feeling like coming home to a place she had never been. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Cole rested his forehead against hers. "This is crazy," he whispered. "I know. You should go to Green River, live your life, forget about me." "I should," she agreed, "but I am not going to." He pulled back to look at her. "Zara, I cannot ask you to throw your life away for an outlaw. You are not asking, I am choosing." She took a breath, gathering her courage. "Come with me to Green River. We can say you are my traveling companion, that you protected me when the stage was robbed. No one knows you there. We could have a fresh start. They will be looking for me. They will be looking for a masked outlaw, not a respectable rancher escorting a woman to her aunt's home. Zachary gripped his arms. Cole, you said you wanted a different life. Here it is. Right here, you just have to be brave enough to take it. She could see him wavering, hope and fear warring in his expression. What about your aunt? What would you tell her, the truth? That you rescued me from outlaws and brought me safely to Green River. That I have feelings for you and want you to stay. She smiled. Aunt Margaret is unconventional. She eloped with a gambler when she was 19 and never regretted a day of it, even after he died and left her with nothing but the boarding house. She believes in following your heart, even if it leads somewhere dangerous, especially then. Cole was quiet for a long moment, his hand still on her waist, his eyes searching her face as if trying to memorize every detail. Then, so quietly she almost did not hear it, he said, "All right." Hope blazed through her. "All right, I will come with you to Green River. I will try to be the man you seem to think I am." He cupped her face in his hands. "But Zara, if it becomes clear that I am putting you in danger, if the law catches up to me, I want your promise that you will let me go. Do not try to protect me or lie for me. Your safety is more important than anything else. Only if you promise the same. If staying with me puts you at risk, you will leave." He smiled, that transforming expression that made her heart skip. "Deal." They kissed again, longer this time, and when they finally separated, Zachary felt like her entire world had tilted on its axis. 2 days ago she had been traveling to Green River alone, resigned to a quiet life caring for an ailing aunt. Now she was riding toward the same destination, with a reformed outlaw who made her feel things she had only read about in novels. They mounted up and rode together through the afternoon. The threatened rain held off, though the clouds remained, turning the sky various shades of gray that somehow seemed beautiful rather than dreary. Cole rode close beside her, pointing out landmarks, telling her about the country they were passing through. His knowledge of the land was encyclopedic, gained from years of working cattle across similar terrain. As the sun began to set, the town of Green River came into view, a collection of wooden buildings clustered along the river that gave it its name. Smoke rose from chimneys, and Zachary could see people moving along the main street even at this distance. "Last chance to change your mind," Cole said. "Not a chance." They rode into town as the lamps were being lit, attracting curious looks from the few people still on the streets. Zachary asked directions to the boarding house and was pointed to a 2-story building near the edge of town, painted white with green shutters. A woman was sitting on the porch, a shawl around her shoulders despite the mild evening. She looked up as they approached, and Zachary recognized her aunt from old photographs, though Margaret Nash was thinner than she remembered, with gray threading through her dark hair. "Aunt Margaret," the woman stood, peering through the gathering darkness. "Zachary." "My heavens, child, we have been worried sick. The stage came through yesterday with word that there had been a robbery, that passengers were missing. They said you had been taken." Zachary dismounted, and Cole was immediately there to help her, then moved to help her aunt down the porch steps. Margaret leaned on his offered arm, her eyes sharp as she studied him. "Who is this?" "This is Cole Sutherland," Zachary said. "He rescued me from the outlaws who stopped the stage. He has been protecting me and making sure I arrived safely." It was not exactly the truth, but it was not exactly a lie either. Margaret looked between them, and Zachary had the distinct impression that her aunt saw far more than they were saying. "Well, Mr. Sutherland, I owe you a debt of gratitude," Margaret said finally. "Please, come inside. You both must be exhausted, and I imagine you have quite a story to tell." The boarding house interior was warm and clean, with simple but comfortable furniture and the smell of something savory cooking. Margaret led them to a sitting room and insisted they eat before talking. A young woman named Sarah, who helped run the house, brought out stew and fresh bread, and Zachary realized she was starving over the meal. They told a carefully edited version of events. The stage robbery, Cole happening upon her in the wilderness, his offer to escort her to safety. Margaret listened, asking occasional questions, her eyes never leaving Cole's face. Finally, when the dishes were cleared and Sarah had returned to the kitchen, Margaret settled back in her chair and fixed them both with a knowing look. "Now, do you want to tell me what really happened?" Zachary felt her face flush. "Aunt Margaret, I just told you. You told me a story, child, and not even a particularly good one. You have never been a skilled liar." Margaret turned to Cole. "Mr. Sutherland, I appreciate that you want to protect my niece's reputation, but I am not a fool." "What really happened?" Cole glanced at Zachary, who nodded slightly. If they were going to make this work, they needed at least one ally who knew the truth. "I was one of the men who robbed the stage," Cole said quietly. "I grabbed Zara by mistake, thinking she was someone else. When I realized my error, I could not in good conscience abandon her in the wilderness, so I brought her here. Along the way He paused, seeming to search for words. "We came to care for each other. I am hoping to start over here in Green River if you will give me that chance." Margaret was silent for a long moment. Then, to Zachary's surprise, she smiled. "Well, at least now I believe you. What you are describing is idiotic, reckless, and completely improbable, which means it is probably true." "Aunt Margaret," "Hush, child, I am not finished." Margaret looked at Cole again. "Are you wanted?" "Probably. The stage company will have reported the robbery. But they did not see your face." "No, madam, we wore masks. And your companions? Will they give you up if they are caught?" "No, they have already headed to Colorado." "As far as anyone knows, there were 4 men involved in the robbery, not 5. Margaret nodded slowly. "So if you keep your head down, stay out of trouble, there is no reason anyone in Green River should connect you to that crime. That is my hope. And what are your intentions toward my niece?" Cole did not hesitate. "To marry her if she will have me, to build a life here, an honest life, to be worthy of the faith she has placed in me." Zachary's heart soared at the certainty in his voice, even as part of her wondered if they were both insane for thinking this could work. Margaret studied them both for another long moment, then sighed. "I must be getting soft in my old age. All right, Mr. Sutherland. You can stay here at the boarding house until you find work and a place of your own, but I will be watching you. One step out of line, one sign that you are putting Zachary at risk, and I will turn you in myself. Are we clear?" "Crystal clear, madam, and thank you." "Do not thank me yet. You have no idea how much work running a boarding house requires. If you are staying, you are working." Cole smiled. "I would not have it any other way." Margaret showed Cole to a small room on the 2nd floor, then pulled Zachary aside while he was settling in. "Are you sure about this, child?" her aunt asked quietly. "I meant what I said about giving him a chance, but this is your life, your safety. I do not want you throwing it away for a man you barely know, no matter how handsome he is." "I know it seems crazy," Zachary admitted. "But Aunt Margaret, when I am with him, I feel like myself in a way I never did back in Philadelphia. He sees me, really sees me, not as my father's disappointing daughter or as a woman who should be married off and made respectable. He sees me as Zara, as someone worth listening to and protecting and caring about." "That is important," Margaret agreed. "But feelings change, child. They fade." "Maybe," Zachary said. "But I would rather have this feeling, even if it fades, than spend my whole life being safe and never feeling anything at all." Margaret smiled and cupped Zachary's cheek. "You are braver than I was at your age, all right, We will see what happens. But slowly, you understand. No hasty weddings or rash decisions. Give yourselves time to be sure. Zachary agreed, though part of her felt she was already sure. Still, she understood her aunt's caution, and truthfully, there was wisdom in taking things slowly. The next weeks fell into a pattern. Cole proved himself invaluable around the boarding house, fixing things that had been broken for months, making repairs Margaret had been putting off. He was good with his hands, patient and thorough, and the other boarders took to him quickly. He was careful to be respectful toward Zachary in public, maintaining proper distance, though they found moments alone when they could talk and, occasionally, steal a kiss. Cole also found work at her ranch outside town, helping with spring roundup. The owner, a gruff older man named Tom Crawford, did not ask too many questions about Cole's past, just watched him work for a day and then offered him regular employment. The money was not much, but it was honest, and Cole seemed to grow lighter with each day of legitimate work. Zachary, meanwhile, threw herself into helping Margaret with the boarding house. Her aunt's illness turned out to be exhaustion more than anything serious, and with Zachary handling much of the daily work, Margaret's health improved noticeably. Zachary discovered she enjoyed the work, enjoyed the variety of people who passed through, the challenge of keeping everything running smoothly. She also began teaching. One of the boarders mentioned that his children had no school to attend, and Zachary offered to give them lessons. Word spread, and soon she had a small group of students meeting in the boarding house parlor 3 afternoons a week. It was not formal, and she was not paid much, but it gave her a sense of purpose she had never found in Philadelphia. 6 weeks after their arrival in Green River, Cole asked Zachary to take a walk with him. They strolled along the river in the long twilight of early summer, watching the water flow past and listening to birdsong from the cottonwoods. "I have been talking to Tom Crawford," Cole said. "He has a section of land he wants to sell, about 100 acres north of his main ranch. It is not much, but there is water and decent grazing. I have been saving every penny from my wages, and I almost have enough for a down payment." Zachary's heart beat faster. "You are thinking of buying land." "I am thinking of buying a future," Cole said. He stopped walking and turned to face her, taking both her hands in his. "Zara, these past weeks have been the best of my life. Working honestly, building something real, being with you. I know your aunt said to take things slow, and I have tried, but I cannot wait any longer to ask. Will you marry me?" She had known the question was coming, had been expecting it, but still her breath caught. This was it, the moment when she committed fully to this new life, to this man who had started as her kidnapper and become her heart. "Yes," she said simply. "Yes, Cole, I will marry you." He kissed her then, right there by the river with the sunset painting the sky in shades of gold and crimson. When they finally broke apart, both smiling so hard their faces hurt, he reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band. "It was my mother's," he said. "The only thing of hers I managed to save from the ranch. I know it is not fancy, but it is perfect," Zachary interrupted, slipping it onto her finger. It fit as if it had been made for her. They walked back to the boarding house hand in hand, and when they told Margaret, she cried and hugged them both and declared they would have the wedding right there, in the boarding house parlor, with all the boarders and half the town invited. The wedding took place 3 weeks later, on a beautiful July morning when the sky was impossibly blue, and the air smelled of sage and wildflowers. Zachary wore a simple cream-colored dress that Margaret had helped her sew, and Cole wore a new suit that Tom Crawford had insisted on buying him as a wedding gift. The parlor was packed with people, familiar faces from the town and the ranch, all there to celebrate. The circuit preacher performed the ceremony, and when he pronounced them man and wife, the room erupted in cheers. Cole kissed her thoroughly, making her blush and the crowd laugh, and then they were swept up in congratulations and well wishes. The celebration lasted well into the night, with food and music and dancing. Zachary danced with Cole, with Margaret, with Tom Crawford, and half a dozen other men from town. She felt like she was floating, like her happiness could not be contained within one person. Late in the evening, Cole pulled her aside to the porch where they had first arrived all those weeks ago. "Happy?" he asked. "Deliriously," Zachary said. She leaned against him, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady beat of his heart. "Are you? More than I ever thought possible." He kissed the top of her head. "I keep thinking about that day on the stage, about how if I had grabbed the right woman, none of this would have happened. I would have ransomed Mrs. Whitmore, taken the money, and moved on. I never would have met you." "I think about that too," Zachary admitted. "About how one mistake, one moment of confusion, changed everything." "Best mistake I ever made," Cole said. They stood together in the darkness, listening to the music and laughter from inside, and Zachary felt a contentment she had never known before. This was not the life she had imagined for herself, not the safe, predictable future she had expected. It was better. The weeks after the wedding were a whirlwind of activity. Cole finalized the purchase of the land from Tom Crawford, borrowing the last bit needed from Margaret, who insisted it was an investment in family. They began building a small house on the property, and Zachary threw herself into planning their future home with the same energy she brought to everything else. The house was modest, just 4 rooms, but it was theirs. Cole did most of the building himself, with help from Tom's ranch hands and some of the men from town. Zachary worked alongside him when she could, hammering nails and helping raise walls, learning construction the same way she was learning everything else about frontier life. They moved into the house in late August, when the grass was golden and the nights were beginning to cool. It felt like stepping into a dream, closing the door on their first night alone together as husband and wife in their own home. Cole built up the fire while Zachary unpacked the few belongings they had brought. When she turned around, he was watching her with an expression that made her pulse quicken. "Come here," he said softly. She went to him, and he pulled her close, his hands gentle on her waist. "I love you, Zara Sutherland." "I love you too," she whispered, and then there were no more words, just the two of them and the firelight, and a love that had started in chaos and grown into something solid and real. The months passed, falling into the rhythm of ranch life. Cole worked the land, building up a small herd of cattle with help from Tom Crawford. Zachary continued teaching, now in a small schoolhouse that the town had built specifically for her students. She rode the 5 miles to town 3 times a week, loving the work and the children who looked up to her. In December, as the first snows began to fall, Zachary discovered she was pregnant. She told Cole on Christmas morning, his gift wrapped in simple paper. He held the tiny knitted booties she had made, staring at them as if he could not quite comprehend what they meant. "A baby," he said finally, his voice rough with emotion. "A baby," she confirmed. "Due in early summer." He kissed her then, deeply and thoroughly, and when he pulled back his eyes were wet. "I am going to be a father. You are going to be an amazing father." The pregnancy progressed smoothly, and as spring returned to Wyoming, Zachary felt herself blooming along with the wildflowers. She continued teaching until she was too round to comfortably ride to town, then helped Cole with ranch work in ways that did not require heavy lifting. Margaret visited often, fussing over her and bringing supplies for the baby. In June of 1879, almost exactly a year after Zachary had first been grabbed from that stage, she gave birth to a son. The labor was long and difficult, with Margaret and the town doctor in attendance, but when it was over and she held the tiny, squalling infant in her arms, every moment of pain was forgotten. Cole wept when he held his son for the first time, this big, strong man reduced to tears by the weight of the tiny life in his arms. They named him Thomas Crawford Sutherland, after the man who had given Cole a second chance, and Tom himself cried when they told him. Those first months of parenthood were exhausting and wonderful in equal measure. Thomas was a good baby, healthy and strong, with his father's dark hair and his mother's eyes. Cole proved to be as devoted a father as Zachary had predicted, walking the floor with Thomas when he was fussy, changing diapers without complaint, singing softly to lull him to sleep. The ranch continued to grow. Cole's herd increased, and he bought more land adjacent to their original property. Tom Crawford proved to be more than just an employer. He became a mentor and friend, teaching Cole everything he knew about running a successful operation. The two families spent holidays together, and Tom insisted that Thomas call him Grandpa. Zachary's school grew as well. More families moved to the area, and she found herself teaching 15 students of varying ages. She loved watching their minds open, loved seeing them discover the joy of learning. Several of her students went on to higher education, a source of immense pride for her. 2 years after Thomas was born, Zachary gave birth to twin daughters, Catherine and Claire. The house suddenly seemed very small with 3 young children, so Cole built an addition, expanding their home to accommodate their growing family. The twins were utterly different from each other despite being identical in appearance. Catherine was quiet and thoughtful, while Claire was bold and adventurous. Life settled into a pattern of comfortable chaos. The ranch thrived, the children grew, and Cole and Zachary's love deepened with each passing year. There were challenges, of course. Hard winters that killed cattle, dry summers that stressed the grass, childhood illnesses that sent them racing to town for the doctor. But they weathered each storm together, their bond strengthened by shared trials. 5 years after the twins were born, Zachary gave birth to another son, Michael. He was their last child, arriving when Zachary was 32 and Cole was 36. Michael was a surprise, unplanned but deeply loved, with a sunny disposition that won everyone's heart. Margaret remained a constant presence in their lives, spending winters in the house in Green River and summers out at the ranch. She adored her grandnieces and grandnephews, as she called them, and they adored her back. She told them stories about their mother as a girl, about their father's heroic rescue, carefully editing the truth to maintain the fiction they had crafted. Thomas grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and seemed born to work the land. The twins developed distinct personalities as they grew. Catherine loved books and learning, while Claire was happiest on horseback riding the range. Michael was the charmer, able to talk his way out of trouble and into everyone's good graces. The years passed. The children grew. The ranch expanded. Cole and Zachary grew older together, silver threading their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Cole surprised Zachary with a trip to Cheyenne, their first time away from the children and the ranch since they had married. They stayed in a hotel, ate in restaurants, and walked the city streets hand in hand like newlyweds. On their last night there, lying in bed in their hotel room, Cole pulled her close and said, "Do you ever regret it? The life you could have had if I had not grabbed you that day?" Zachary turned to look at him, this man who had been her abductor, her protector, her husband, her partner in all things. His face was more weathered now, marked by years of outdoor work, but his eyes were still that remarkable storm color, still capable of making her heart skip. "Not for a single second," she said truthfully. "You gave me a life I never could have imagined. You gave me love and children and purpose. You gave me myself." "I grabbed the wrong woman that day," Cole said softly, "but somehow I found exactly the right one." They kissed, and it was sweet and familiar and still capable of sending shivers down her spine after all these years. The years continued to pass, marked by the milestones of their children's lives. Thomas took over more and more of the ranch work as he grew into a young man, showing the same dedication and skill his father had. Catherine went east to college, the first in the family to do so, studying literature like her grandfather. Claire married a neighboring rancher and started her own family, proving to be as skilled at ranching as any man. Michael, the charmer, became a lawyer, settling in Cheyenne but visiting often. Margaret passed away peacefully in her sleep when Zachary was 40, surrounded by the family who loved her. They buried her in Green River, and Zachary inherited the boarding house, which she sold to Sarah, who had helped run it for years. Cole's father died a year later, having never fully recovered from his stroke, but having lived long enough to meet his grandchildren and see his son build a successful life. Frank, who had stayed with the old man to the end, came to the funeral and stayed for dinner. He was the only one of Cole's former gang who ever visited, the others having scattered to the winds. Frank had gone straight as well, working as a ranch foreman in Montana, and he and Cole spent the evening reminiscing about old times, carefully editing their stories for young ears. As Zachary and Cole entered their 50s, they began to slow down. Thomas and his wife took over day-to-day management of the ranch, while Cole and Zachary moved into a smaller house on the property, built specifically for them by their children. They spent their days reading, walking, tending a garden, and spoiling their growing number of grandchildren. On a summer evening much like the one when Cole had proposed, they sat on the porch of their small house, watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of gold and pink. They held hands, comfortable in the silence that came from decades of companionship. "You remember the first time we sat together and watched a sunset?" Cole asked. "In the canyon after you kidnapped me," Zachary said with a smile. "How could I forget? I knew that night," Cole said quietly. "Knew that you were going to change my life. I just did not know how much." "I knew too," Zachary admitted. "I was terrified and exhilarated in equal measure. Part of me wanted to run away and part of me wanted to stay forever. Thank you for staying. Thank you for being worth staying for." They sat together as the sun disappeared below the horizon and the first stars began to emerge. Somewhere in the distance, they could hear their grandchildren playing, their laughter carrying on the evening breeze. The ranch that Cole had built stretched out before them, a testament to hard work and determination and second chances. Zachary leaned her head on Cole's shoulder, feeling the solid warmth of him, the steady rise and fall of his breathing. They had lived a good life together, full of love and laughter and hard work. They had raised 4 children who were now raising children of their own. They had built something lasting, something real. "I love you, Zara," Cole said softly, the same words he had spoken countless times over the decades. "I love you too," she replied, the same response she had given every time. And as the stars emerged fully, painting the Wyoming sky with light, they sat together, the outlaw and the woman he had grabbed by mistake, who had somehow found in each other exactly what they needed. The story that had begun with chaos and confusion had become a love story for the ages, a testament to the power of second chances and the courage to seize happiness even when it came in unexpected packages. Years later, when their great-grandchildren asked how they had met, Zachary would smile and tell them a carefully edited version of the truth. She would talk about a stage robbery and a brave man who had protected her, about falling in love in the wilderness and building a life together in Wyoming. She would leave out the part about Cole being one of the robbers, about the terror and uncertainty of those first few days. But sometimes, when she and Cole were alone, they would remember the whole truth. They would laugh about the absurdity of it all, about how a botched robbery had led to the greatest love either of them had ever known. They would marvel at the path their lives had taken, at the family they had built, at the legacy they would leave behind. Cole Sutherland had grabbed the wrong woman from that stage all those years ago. But in doing so, he had found the right woman for him, the partner who would stand beside him through every trial and triumph, the love that would sustain him through all the years of his life. And Zachary Nash Sutherland, who had been traveling to a small frontier town to care for an ailing aunt, had found something she had never even known she was looking for: a grand adventure, a great love, and a life that was entirely her own. The outlaw had become a rancher, a husband, a father, a grandfather. The kidnapped woman had become a teacher, a wife, a mother, a pillar of her community. Together, they had become more than either could have been alone, their love a beacon that would shine through generations. As they grew older still, their children and grandchildren around them, the ranch thriving under Thomas's capable management, they knew they had been blessed. Not because their life had been easy, for it had not been. Not because they had never faced hardship or sorrow, for they had faced plenty of both. They were blessed because they had found each other, because they had chosen love over fear, because they had been brave enough to seize the chance for happiness when it presented itself, even in the most unlikely of circumstances. And when Cole Sutherland passed away peacefully at the age of 78, surrounded by his wife and children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, his last words were to Zachary, the woman he had grabbed from a stage so long ago. "Best mistake I ever made," he whispered, and she smiled through her tears and kissed his weathered cheek and told him she loved him one last time. Zachary lived another 5 years, surrounded by the family they had built together, the ranch that had been their life's work. She taught her great-grandchildren to read, told them stories about their remarkable grandfather, and watched the sunset every evening from the porch of the small house Cole had built for their retirement. When she passed away in her sleep at the age of 81, it was with a smile on her face, the gold band Cole had given her still on her finger. They buried her beside him in the small cemetery outside Green River, and the whole town turned out for the funeral of the woman who had taught so many of them, who had been such a vital part of their community for so many years. The ranch stayed in the family, passed down through the generations, each one adding to what Cole and Zachary had started. The story of how they met became family legend, carefully edited but no less romantic for the editing. Their great-great-grandchildren would grow up hearing about the outlaw who had grabbed the wrong woman and found true love, about the woman brave enough to give a second chance to a man who had made mistakes. But the truth, known only to a precious few, was even better than the legend. It was a story of redemption and courage, of love blooming in the most unlikely circumstances, of two people who had found in each other exactly what they needed, even if they had not known they were looking for it. The outlaw had grabbed the wrong woman from the stage. The cowboy in him had fallen helplessly in love, and together they had lived a life worth living, a love worth having, a legacy worth leaving. Their story was complete, their love eternal, their ending as happy as any tale ever told beneath the wide Wyoming sky.